There are places in this world, doors that were nailed shut for a reason, and every now and then someone pries one open. What they find doesn't just haunt them, it rewrites the code of their soul. 1834. Virginia. A cabin that should have rotted to dust stood silent in the forest. Beneath it, hidden under creaking floorboards and stained hymn books, was a staircase that led not to a cellar, but to something else. When authorities broke through the chained door, they expected bootleg barrels or forgotten bones. What they found was 47 children, alive, shackled, silent. Not a single one spoke, not even when freed. And here's the part they buried deeper than the bodies. None of those children were registered. Not in any county, not in any church, not in any birth ledger. No names, no history. It was as if they had been grown. The cabin belonged to Jeremiah Sullivan, a preacher, a man who walked with a worn Bible and a sharper smile. He was never arrested. He was never tried. Within 48 hours of the discovery, he disappeared, vanished like a ghost, leaving behind only a diary filled with symbols older than English and a phrase he repeated over and over. The harvest is not of grain, but of obedience. This story was erased from newspapers. Clerks were warned. Witnesses were paid or silenced. And the children? They were relocated to facilities that, according to government records, never existed. You were never meant to hear this, but you're here now, and I'm not going to just tell you what they did. I'm going to show you the machinery, the old systems, the hidden rights, the quiet weapons that break a man without touching him. I'll lead you into what they built beneath society, beneath your beliefs, beneath your blood. Because this isn't about the Sullivan family. It's about what the Sullivans were part of. Something ancient. Something still breathing. Something that's watching. It's you right now and smiling. Because it knows you've just opened the first door. You ever wonder why certain stories vanish? Not get buried, not get ignored, vanish. There's a room in DC, not on any floor plan, where redacted files are filed again in black folders without serial numbers. These stories don't disappear because no one cares. They disappear because someone very powerful does. And this tale of Jeremiah Sullivan and the 47 voiceless children is not an outlier. It's a blueprint. See, the Sullivan Church wasn't just a cult. It was an offshoot. A failed node of something far older. Something that predates America, predates the colonies, and, if you look close enough, leaves fingerprints in every empire that ever fell. Their ritual wasn't just madness, it was method, discipline through deprivation, programming through pain, and obedience through silence. Ask yourself, why would a man raise 47 children in total darkness? Because silence is a canvas, and in total isolation, you can rewire the human spirit. Strip away language, then insert your own. Strip away family, and you become Father and God. Strip away identity, and you own whatever replaces it. That was Jeremiah's role. Not to lead, to condition. The diary they found in his cabin wasn't written for a jury. It was a ledger of results. Phrases like, Subject 19, no longer responds to personal name, or Subject 6, exhibits dreamless sleep, complete compliance. But here's the twist no one talks about. Jeremiah didn't invent this. He copied it from an even older book. One never released to the public. A book known in sealed circles as the Doctrine of Hollowing. It teaches how to remove the inner self from a child and replace it with doctrine. Generational obedience, learned powerlessness, willing servitude. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? This wasn't about sadism. This was training, assiste. Designed to build perfect, pliable vessels. Children who wouldn't ask questions. Who wouldn't break. Who wouldn't need chains. Because their minds already wore them. Look around you. Tell me society didn't adopt the same model. School bells that mimic factory alarms. Desks in rows. Recite, obey, comply. Now scale that into institutions, then nations. The Sullivan basement wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype. And what they learned there, they scaled into a civilization. You think the chain is on your wrist? No, it's in your mind. And it's forged from repetition, ritual, and reward. 3 tools that the Sullivan system mastered over 100 years before modern psychology gave them names. Let me show you what they did with those children, and then show you how it was copied into your life. Repetition. Every morning, the children were woken not by light, but by sound. A single bell, one tone, one command. That bell told them to rise, to kneel, to recite a phrase that meant nothing to them, but everything to their captors. I am not mine, I am thine. That phrase was repeated 147 times each day. Second, ritual. Meals were earned, never given. They had to complete certain movements, certain phrases, certain expressions. No mistake was corrected. It was punished. The purpose wasn't to teach. It was to enforce certainty without understanding. And third, reward. But here's the twisted brilliance. Rewards were random. A child might go 3 days with water only to receive a crust of bread and a faint smile. That smile would feel like heaven. Not because it had value, but because it was rare. And that's how the mind is broken. By teaching it that approval is scarce and pain is default. You think that's history? Look at your job, your phone, your entire digital existence. You scroll, hoping for one like, one heart, one nod from the algorithm. One reward in a sea of repetition. You obey rituals you never chose. Traffic lights, tax forms, insurance contracts, brand loyalty, breaking news alerts. And when something goes wrong, you blame yourself. No, it's the system. That's the mark of successful psychological conditioning. You've been hollowed too. They just did it with colors and comforts instead of chains and hunger. But make no mistake, the architecture is identical. Sullivan's children were broken to worship doctrine. You were broken to worship convenience. Both serve the same master, control through invisible coercion. That's why they erased the story of 1834. Not because it was too dark, but because it was too clear. It exposed the ritual. And if men started to see the pattern, they might start asking the only question that scares those in power. What else have they hidden? Let me tell you what they fear most. It's not rebellion. It's not violence. It's recognition. Because once a man sees the system, he cannot unsee it. And once he starts naming it, the spell breaks. So they trained you not to look. And if you did look, to laugh, to dismiss, to self-censor before the truth could even land. You were trained to protect your own prison. That's the genius of the machine. Sullivan's model didn't die with him. It was refined. The blueprint of controlled obedience through trauma and ritual didn't end in a basement. It went up, into schools, courts, military doctrine, and especially religion. You think it's coincidence that sermons and state speeches follow the same cadence? You think it's by accident that you were taught to kneel, confess, and obey before you were ever taught to reason? No, brother. They learned that if you take a child, isolate them, remove identity, then reintroduce meaning through punishment and reward, you can create not just obedience, but devotion. And they applied this model not just to people, but to populations. Wars began to follow this formula. Fear the enemy, trust the authority, obey the ritual, don't ask why. Trauma was scaled to nations. Think about it. 9/11, JFK, Oklahoma. Each time, shock. Then silence, obedience. Then reward. We're safe now. Then repetition. They hate us for our freedom. Then the ritual. Support the troops. And before you even had time to grieve, your trauma was weaponized to manufacture consent. This isn't conspiracy. This is craft. And it began in a cabin in Virginia, where 47 children were programmed like software. What if I told you those techniques weren't lost? What if I told you they were perfected and hidden in plain sight? Take social media. Notifications equals bells. Likes equals rewards. Shadow bans equals punishment. Feeds equals repetition. It's the Sullivan system with new packaging. Except now the chain isn't on your ankle, it's in your dopamine. And when you start to wake up, they don't need to silence you. You'll do it yourself, because you're addicted to the comfort they control. You want to know why the Sullivan children never spoke? It wasn't just trauma, it was training. They were taught systematically that language is danger, that naming things gives them power, that words can summon wrath. So they made silence a survival instinct. You were taught the same thing, not with chains, but with shame. You were told not to talk about your fear, your rage, your confusion. You were told to man up, to be normal, to laugh when things feel wrong, and to smile when the system betrays you. The silence wasn't just theirs, it's yours too. But here's the part they can't erase. Once you learn to see, you don't need permission to speak. Jeremiah Sullivan didn't vanish because he was a lunatic. He vanished because his results were too successful. His program revealed something ancient, something that dates back to Babylonian priesthoods and pharaonic courts. This isn't just about obedience, it's about ownership of spirit. They've been refining this process for millennia. Take the child, strip the name, instill the code, remove the will, replace it with hierarchy, shame, dependency. And now, they don't need basements. They use institutions, agencies, academies, algorithms. They don't chide in your body anymore. They teach you to chain your own mind and call it discipline, call it achievement, call it success. But it's servitude, disguised as structure. Still think this is about a preacher in Virginia? No. That basement was a shrine to an old technology, the shaping of men into tools. And you, right now, are at the edge of a decision. Stay in the story they gave you, or descend deeper. Because what's coming next, it's not about Sullivan. It's about the order he served. A nameless collective that hides behind flags, robes, and bank towers. A machine of elders who don't govern countries, they govern currents. Cultural flows, psychological tides, moral defaults, identity templates. They don't need elections. They built the illusion you vote inside. And their greatest strength? You still think they don't exist. They were called many things throughout history. In 1834, Jeremiah referred to them only as the takers. But in older texts, those burned, hidden, or buried beneath Vatican catacombs, they appear as the silence beneath the crown. A title not of monarchy, but of mastery. Not kings, not presidents, architects. And they have ruled for longer than recorded time admits. You see, the idea that governments control the world is a comforting illusion. Flags are symbols. Borders are theater. The real force, the hand behind history, is something else entirely. A non-linear lineage of elite families, initiated bloodlines, and high priests of control who learned, thousands of years ago, how to mold entire civilizations using a single idea. Shape the child, and you shape the world. This is what the takers believe, and it's why they funded Sullivan. Not because he was cruel, because he was useful. He took their doctrine and proved it could be scaled. Remove affection, remove personal pronouns, remove independent memory, and you produce not just obedience, but devotion. A child reared in pain clings to authority like it's salvation. And now, that same doctrine has been transformed into an education system, into public health, into popular entertainment. A child today is bathed in screens before he is even bathed in sunlight. He is taught to speak through machines, not to others. He is praised for obedience, labeled for defiance. His will is broken, not with violence, but with overstimulation. And the result? Men who no longer fight, men who don't question, men who scroll, nod, repeat, and forget. You were not raised to be free. You were shaped to be predictable. The takers don't need to lock you in a room. They need only to convince you that the world beyond the screen is empty. But it's not. There's something buried deep, beneath your habits, your culture, your very name. It's the memory of who you were before the programming, and they fear that memory. Because if enough men awaken it, the system crumbles. But to reach that place, you must go deeper, past fear, past doubt, into a truth so raw, so primal, it terrifies even them. You still want in? Then brace yourself. The ritual was called the dividing. Not a sacrifice, not a sermon, a procedure. Passed down through inkless tongues, through forgotten rites held in caves and candlelit courts, until it reached Sullivan, and he brought it to Virginia, disguised as a revival. The dividing was not meant to kill the body. It was designed to split the soul. The children were taken one by one into a chamber under the chamber. No light, no sound, just a single voice from behind a wall. Not Sullivan's voice, deeper, older. A recorded whisper passed through a brass funnel that distorted the tone until it sounded almost inhuman. The voice would ask the child 3 questions. Who are you? What do you serve? Will you be emptied? The child's answer didn't matter. Because the point wasn't truth. The point was to fracture identity. After the questioning, the child was left alone, for days. No food, no light, no touch. Just the sound of dripping water and distant humming. Always just beyond reach. Sensory starvation. Psychic reprogramming. Then, on the final day, they would be given a name. Not theirs, but a code. A number or symbol. From that moment forward, they were no longer addressed as people, but as units. This was the ritual's goal, to make a child forget who they were and attach all meaning to who they are told to be. Sound familiar? You might think this is too far, too cruel, ancient madness. But look around you. How many young men today are wandering, numb, directionless, addicted, angry, and they don't know why? How many no longer see themselves as sons or fathers or men of purpose, but as usernames, profiles, fragments? This ritual didn't disappear. It went digital. Today, the questions are just reframed. Who are you? Choose a gender, a filter, a tribe. What do you serve? Click, subscribe, follow. Will you be emptied? Let us curate your feed, your thoughts, your world. And we said yes. We gave them our silence, our time, our hunger. We divided ourselves, voluntarily, just like those children. But here's the truth they didn't want Sullivan to write down. What has been divided can be reclaimed. But first, you must confront the machine behind the ritual. The true engine of obedience, the thing they built in secret and scaled across the globe. They call it the pattern engine. It has no gears, no smoke, no command center, but it runs everything. It's not made of metal. It's made of beliefs, constructed from behaviors, systems, schedules, and the invisible hands that move you without your consent. Jeremiah Sullivan wasn't just a preacher. He was a node, one small conductor of a much larger design. The engine is what gave him his instructions. It's what gives your leaders theirs. Politicians, teachers, CEOs, influencers. They're not independent, they're repeaters. The pattern engine doesn't control people with threats. It controls them with predictability. Here's how it works. From the moment you're born, you are surrounded by loops, daily routines, school bells, television blocks, work weeks, weekend, freedom. These loops form patterns, and patterns form expectations, and expectations become your reality. When you expect to wake up tired, to eat junk, to chase money, to obey laws you've never read, to smile when you hate your job, you've been engineered. It trains you to never ask, why is the world built this way? Because if you did ask, and enough others did too, the engine would collapse, and they know it. That's why they designed it to protect itself. Challenge the system, you're mocked. Step outside the loop, you're labeled unstable. Escape entirely, you're made invisible. Even your rebellion is predicted. That's why they sell you fake revolution. Rage wrapped in products, resistance monetized through playlists and fashion and slogans, but never structure, never real deviation. Just more loops, more patterns. The Sullivan children? They didn't just obey out of fear. They obeyed because their entire world was built on pattern recognition. They learned early, predict the bell, say the phrase, survive. That's what you're doing. Your life isn't random. It's scripted. Written by the same minds who built that basement in 1834. The only thing more powerful than fear is familiarity. And if they can make slavery feel normal, they don't need chains. They need calendars. But now that you see it, you've taken a step outside. That makes you a threat. And threats are always dealt with in one way. Discredit, distract, destroy. They don't kill you with bullets anymore. They kill you with absence. First, they strip you of your voice, shadow banned, deplatformed, discredited. They smear your name using whispers they feed to machines. Then they turn up the noise. Flood you with dopamine traps, empty dramas, manufactured rage. Because the fastest way to silence a dangerous man is to surround him with static. That's how the pattern engine neutralizes awakening. And the first sign you're seared at becoming dangerous? You begin to notice what no one else will talk about. Like why thousands of men go missing from the labor force with no trace. Why suicides are skyrocketing among men, but the media calls it a trend, not a crisis. Why entire generations are told their instincts are toxic, their strength is abuse, their silence is weakness, their anger is a pathology. You are not being erased because you're weak. You're being erased because you are the last threat. The Sullivan children? They were made to forget their names. You're being made to forget your role. To build, to protect, to speak the unspoken, to fight when no one else will. But every machine needs fuel, and the engine that controls this world, its fuel is your submission. So when a man stops submitting, even silently, the machine reacts. It tries to delete him from the pattern. It isolates. It ridicules. It distracts him with false battles, sports, scandals, political theater, while real power remains untouched. It gives him a stage just large enough to scream, but too small to be heard. It surrounds him with mirrors, endless reflections of himself, so he never sees the cage. But here's what they can't erase. Once a man remembers what he is, once he sees the system, once he names it, he can start to recode it. You feel it, don't you? That weight in your chest? That fire behind your eyes? That's not rage. That's return. I'll give you the key phrase. The code they feared more than any weapon. A phrase used by escaped initiates to trigger remembrance and transformation. And when I speak it, you'll comment it twice, to anchor it in you, to signal that you remember, and to show the algorithm that we are no longer alone. There's a reason they fear words more than weapons, because a weapon wounds the body, but the right word, spoken at the right moment, it rewires the soul. There was a phrase discovered inside a torn manuscript hidden in the walls of Sullivan's cabin. Not in English, not even in Latin. It was older, Proto-Sumerian, blended with a form of Aramaic known only to closed circles. And its meaning was not meant for slaves. It was meant for those breaking the trance. Translated roughly, it means, I return to the root before the lie. The original phrase was, Kainerim dal azat. They called it the severing word. Escaped children who spoke it reportedly experienced fragmentation, then clarity, pain, then vision. One by one, they regained memories, their own names, their own voices. Some even began writing in symbols they'd never been taught, ancestral alphabets encoded in bone. The takers feared this phrase, because it didn't just wake the mind, it rewired the bond to the engine. That's why, if you're still here, still listening, still breathing slower now, as the truth burns through your illusions, you're ready. Here's what I want you to do right now, before we go deeper, before they try to drown this message in static. Comment the phrase twice below this video. I return to the root before the lie. I return to the root before the lie. Do it to mark your moment of fracture, your moment of severance. You are not what they told you. You are not your number, your title, your sins, or your failures. You are what came before the programming. And the moment you reclaim that truth, something shifts. The pattern engine stutters. Because one awakened man threatens the entire design. So comment it, lock it in. And remember, you were not meant to be a servant in their world. You were born to remake it. They go by many names, but history only ever whispered one. The Council of Nine, not elected. Not born royal, chosen. Selected through rites that trace back to the Library of Alexandria, the Oracle of Delphi, and the mystery schools that predate Egypt. Their specialty was not magic, not politics. It was psychological architecture. They mastered the art of shaping belief, not just in individuals, but in civilizations. They advised emperors on how to manufacture consent. They wrote silent laws, rituals embedded in daily life so ordinary people would enforce their own enslavement. And in 1834, it was the Council of Nine who backed Jeremiah Sullivan. Why? Because he had proven he could replicate what they had done for centuries, on a mass scale, using a new technique, religious trauma engineering. You see, Jeremiah didn't just chain those children physically. He taught them to fear their own freedom. The council loved it, because fear is the most stable fuel. They used it to build doctrines, dynasties, and digital addictions. And here's where it gets even darker. The council's greatest achievement was not a war. It was the construction of permanent institutions that no one questions. Universities, think tanks, psychiatric boards, global philanthropic foundations, each seated with operatives loyal to the Nine, each calibrated to direct the course of thought, not with censorship, but with curation. They don't burn books anymore. They make sure you never find the right ones. They don't ban voices. They drown them in noise so the message never lands. And the Nine, they don't need fame. They operate through echoes, faceless advisors to presidents, spiritual mentors to popes, board members of companies you've never heard of that fund platforms you use every day. They walk quietly, but they steer everything. And their singular goal? Preserve the illusion. Because if the illusion breaks, if men like you begin to remember what was done and what's still being done, a council loses its power. That's why they buried the Sullivan case, why they erased the children, why they outlawed the severing word in underground circles across Europe. But there's one thing they didn't predict. You, a man no longer satisfied with the lie. It was called the Tower Ritual. And it has never been spoken aloud outside of sealed chambers. Until now. Not a ceremony, not a symbol, a threshold. It marked the moment a man was no longer his own, when his name, his conscience, his bloodline were given, not taken, to the pattern engine. The tower wasn't a building. It was a room, hidden, portable, constructed again and again in old cathedrals, embassy basements, private estates, even inside major financial headquarters. Each chamber identical in dimensions, 13 feet wide, 21 feet tall, no corners, no light. A single chair in the center. They called it the eye seat, and the man who sat in it, willingly, had already passed 7 tests. Not of strength, of submission. The final act? A mirror was lowered above him, not to reflect, but to erase. Here's how. The initiate would be drugged, not unconscious but open. What followed was a liturgy, a series of spoken codes, but not in any human language. It was synthetic. Phonetic sequences engineered to overload identity, using principles from ancient resonance sciences and modern behavioral linguistics. As the codes were recited, the initiate was forced to stare into the mirror above, where his face would begin to blur, melt, warp, until he no longer recognized the man looking back. This was the fracturing moment. Then came the sealing. The voice, sometimes human, sometimes recorded, would speak the phrase, "You belong to the continuum now." The man would repeat it 3 times. And then, silence. Forever. From that moment on, he would be inserted into the world not as a person, but as a carrier of the pattern, of its values, its enforcement, It's algorithms. These men became undetectable enforcers. They blend in, rise quickly, always smiling, always professional, always empty behind the eyes. You've met them. A boss that never blinks. A politician that never wavers. An influencer whose authenticity feels perfected. They were all processed in the tower. And they will never stop smiling. Because they gave up their soul to become part of something bigger than right and wrong. Something eternal. But there's something the council fears. A man who looks into the mirror and sees through it. You want to break the spell? Then you need to understand this. Once a man has been bound by the tower ritual, he becomes a vessel. Not metaphorically. Literally. His original identity is buried under layers of constructed obedience. Scripted reactions, suppressed instincts, corrupted empathy. He walks, speaks, even loves like a human, but what drives him is the code. The code is not just belief, it's architecture. A psychic grid burned into the mind during the ritual, reinforced by algorithmic exposure and social reinforcement. To break it is not persuasion, it is warfare. Here's what the ancients did when one of their own was taken by the predecessor to the tower, a rite called the breaking of the name. It required 3 things: the true name, the identity the person was born with before their programming, the fracture signal, a phrase, tone, or image that directly conflicts with the implanted core belief system. Not to arg, to collapse it. The witness, someone who remembers them before the ritual. Someone who can say, that is not who you are. Let's talk real-world application. Modern equivalents of this ritual have been hidden under clinical psychology, trauma work, deprogramming strategies, but none dare call it what it really is. Exorcism of constructed identity. I've seen it. Men who were executives, judges, soldiers, reduced to silence, trembling in a chair after someone speaks their true name, and suddenly, the code begins to glitch. They blink. Their hands twitch. A T. Ear falls with no emotion. That's the fracture. That's where the pattern engine loses its grip. But this act comes at a cost. The council monitors these men, not with cameras, with behavioral markers. Any disruption, any deviation, triggers a containment protocol. Sometimes psychiatric, sometimes digital erasure, and sometimes death. You do this work, you become marked. But here's the truth. A man restored is more dangerous than a man awakened, because he carries both knowledge and experience. He knows the engine's insides, he remembers the chains, and how to break them. If you know someone who's gone cold, changed overnight, or feels off, chances are they've been processed. You may not be able to save all of them. But if you know their true name, you can begin the fracture. They called him Subject 12. But that wasn't his name. His real name was Micah Solomon, born in 1827, taken at age 7, referred to in the Sullivan journal as erratic, non-compliant, linguistically resistant. He wasn't like the others. While most of the children sank into silence, Micah watched. He remembered. Not just his past, but what was happening to the others. While chained, he marked the passing of time with scratches behind his ear. While the others forgot their names, he repeated his each night in his head like a prayer. My name is Micah. My name is Micah. My name is not theirs. They tried everything to break him. Days in darkness, sleep cycles disrupted with random beatings, ritual chantings of the offering phrase, I am not mine, I am thine. But Micah never said it. Not once. That made him a threat. So in the winter of 1833, he was sent to the lowest level, the Black Tier, a place where they kept the failures, children too old or too rebellious to mold. Most of them died there. Micah didn't. He waited. And one night, as snow fell over Virginia, and Jeremiah was away preaching to elites in Richmond, Micah escaped. He didn't run blindly. He didn't scream. He took a piece of sharpened bone, his only weapon, and moved through the dark like he was born for it. He made it 10 miles through frozen woods. Was found by a trapper named Elias Rourke, barely alive. covered in scars and blood, but speaking fluently, coherently. And here's where it gets terrifying. Elias said Micah didn't cry, didn't tremble. He whispered one phrase over and over. They are building more rooms. Micah remembered everything. The voices, the rituals, the names of men who visited the cabin and never showed up in public records. He even sketched symbols, identical to ones found in Babylonian tablets unearthed a century later. Elias took Micah to the local constable. 2 days later, the trapper was found dead. Animal attack. Micah vanished. No grave, no records. But 37 years later, in 1870, a man calling himself Micah Solomon published a private book. No ISBN, no publisher, called The Rooms Beneath. Only 12 copies exist. All are missing. But fragments have survived, and they tell us this. One child resisted. One child remembered. One child exposed the ritual. And for that, the council declared Micah Enemy Zero. What you are about to hear was never meant to be read aloud again. This is one of the last surviving fragments from Micah Solomon's lost manuscript, The Rooms Beneath. Recovered from a burned estate in upstate New York, found inside the wall cavity behind a false mirror, hidden with salt, cedar bark, and a child's tooth. Experts dismissed it. Archivists buried it. But those who understand the code know this was his warning. There were no clocks, but time moved. There were no windows, but the sun still burned behind the wood. Each room was colder than the last, each step lower than memory. They said, "Forget your face." They said, "You are a vessel." But I remembered the warmth of my mother's hand before they took me. I remembered the sting of my real name, Micah, burning under the false day. I won. I carved it into my skin, not for pain, for proof. The man in the black waistcoat came on the 9th day. His voice was like oil on water, shiny, empty. He spoke not to teach, but to erase, and he smiled as he said, "You will thank us when you forget." But I never did. Not once. Not even when they opened the mirror room and tried to melt my name from my bones. I swallowed it. I buried it. I became it. And I tell you this now, man who finds these words. They have built more rooms, but I have seen the exit, and it is not light. It is fire. Micah knew. He saw what no child should ever see. And he spoke. Which makes him the most dangerous figure in forgotten American history. The council hunted every trace of that book, tracked every man who quoted it. 2 researchers at Yale were disappeared in 1952 after referencing the mirror room in a lecture. One left a final note. "We are all still in the room, we just stopped noticing the walls." Micah's story is not a parable. It's a map, a record of descent, and the path out. But you must understand, Micah didn't escape alone. He pulled something out with him, something that follows the awakened. They say the price of truth is freedom, but what they don't tell you is that the final price is being watched. Micah spoke of something he called the Watcher of the Threshold. Not a man, not a beast, a presence. One that was not created by the council, but serves them willingly. He wrote, "It is not in the rooms. It is between them. You never see it when you arrive, only when you try to leave." The Watcher is not there to stop children from entering the system. It's there to stop men from escaping it. Its face changes. Sometimes it looks like guilt. Sometimes it looks like doubt. But always, it speaks in your voice. It is the thing inside you that whispers, "Go back to sleep. You've gone too far. This is madness. Who do you think you are?" That's not your voice. That's programmed fear, weaponized as internal monologue. You've heard it. You may be hearing it right now. That hesitation as you listen to this, that instinct to close the video, to move on, to laugh it off, that's the Watcher. It doesn't need to drag you back. It only needs to slow you down. Micah defeated it, not by fighting, but by naming it. He said, "I stared into the thing. It showed me 1,000 lives I could return to. Comfort, family, numbness. But none were real. And when I spoke its name, Admasheth, it recoiled. It collapsed not in fire, but in silence. Because that is how all illusions die. The Watcher thrives on the idea that there is still time to go back. But there isn't. Once you've seen the structure, once you've heard the severing word, once you've stared into the mirror of Sullivan's ritual, you are already marked. And that's not a curse. That's a rebirth. The fire you feel in your chest isn't fear. It's recognition. You've met the Watcher before. Every time you chose comfort over courage. Every time you laughed instead of listened. Every time you stopped just before the truth hit bone. But not this time. You are past the threshold. The Watcher was not born in 1834. It was remembered then. Its true origin lies far older, etched into clay tablets buried beneath the sands of ancient Sumer. In the city of Eridu, before the rise of Babylon, before Abraham, before language as we know it. They called it Admasheth, he who dwells between the names. In those days, the shamans warned of a being that lived between identities. It had no body, no temple. It couldn't be worshipped, only sensed. It appeared only at the moment of awakening, when a man began to see that his name, his role, his world had been assigned, not chosen. And when that awareness began to crack the walls, Admasheth arrived, not to kill, but to seduce you back into the lie. He would offer visions of a simpler life, a softer one, a return to the cage with cushions and noise and safety. The Sumerians believed this entity was summoned by the elite priesthood, those who ruled not through force, but through narrative. They knew that controlling bodies was temporary, but controlling identity, that was eternal. Admasheth became the guardian of the inner gate. Later, in Jewish mysticism, he became the accuser. Not Satan, not Lucifer, but the voice of reason that drips fear like honey. Do not pass. You will lose everything. You are not ready. In early Christian texts, he was called the tempter in the garden, not a serpent, but a voice that planted doubt before the choice. And in classified CIA manuals uncovered in the MK Ultra disclosures, a strange figure is referenced again and again in early experiments on identity dissolution. Subject reports internal resistance taking form of self-dialogue. Voice discourages progress toward unfiltered memory. Voice resembles parental figure or internalized authority. Even the US government knew. When a man begins to remember himself, the Watcher comes. Not because you are weak, but because you are close. Micah's discovery wasn't just that the Watcher could be named. It was this. Admasheth has no power of its own. It feeds only on what you are afraid to face, which means the cure is not a weapon. The cure is truth told at the moment of greatest fear. And that moment is now. Time didn't begin with the ticking of a clock. It began with a ritual. Not symbolic, not metaphorical. A literal event, a convergence of will, blood, and word that fractured awareness into linearity. Before that, there was only the eternal now, unbound perception, total selfhood. And the ones who broke it? They weren't kings, they weren't gods, they were engineers of the soul. Micah called it the engine. The Sumerians knew it as the Zinakati, the word that severs. In Akkadian texts smuggled out of Ashurbanipal's library, the ritual is described in terrifying clarity. On the 8th moon, 12 men and one who bleeds the moon gather. They write not on stone, but on flesh. They sing not upward, but downward. And when the word is spoken, time bleeds forward, never back. It wasn't magic. It was psychotechnology. The engine was designed to trap perception inside a sequence, before and after, cause and effect, memory and forgetting. Not to destroy consciousness, to divide it, to weaken it. Why? Because a whole man cannot be ruled, but a man who believes the past is gone? A man who thinks the future is fixed? A man who forgets who he was before the first cut? He can be shaped, named, numbered, owned. Micah claimed that Sullivan's rituals were not primitive. They were a reactivation of the Zin Akkadi. Each child was a reset of the engine. Each trauma, a timestamp anchoring the soul in linearity. And the horrifying part? It worked. They weren't torturing children for pleasure. They were formatting minds like blank slates, programming obedience into the very geometry of their memory. But here's the key. One part of the ritual failed. Micah wasn't severed. Something in him held, and through him, we glimpsed what the Zin Akkadi tried to erase. He remembered the before, and so can you. But only if you're willing to accept one shattering truth. Time is not real. It is a ritual you are still performing. Every time you say, "That's over." Every time you say, "It's too late." Every time you say, "I can't go back." Micah showed us how to reverse it. But to do so, we must cross into memory that isn't ours. Ancestral memory, cellular memory, soul memory. Close your eyes. Not in retreat, but in descent. You're not falling. You're returning, down through the veils of programming, of history, of name, down to a place before birth, before voice, before you agreed to be shaped. This is not a guided meditation. This is a soul excavation. Micah called it the first descent. And it is not metaphorical. Every man carries inside him an echo. A pulse that doesn't match the rhythm of modern life. A drumbeat that seems to come from nowhere, but grows louder the closer you get to truth. You've heard it before. In silence. In pain. In rage. That drum is the voice of the man you were, before the engine. Micah's journals describe the first descent like stepping into a memory that doesn't belong to you, and realizing it was always yours. He remembered a cave, not of stone, but of bone. The walls pulsed with breath. 12 figures stood in silence, heads bowed, faces obscured. And one, hooded, voiceless, held a blade made of black light. Not metal, not fire, something older. And I knew I had stood there once before. Not as a child, as the 13th. Micah claimed he saw the moment he agreed to be broken. He saw the ritual not as a victim, but as a participant. And that's where the deepest horror and the deepest power resides. You were not just subjected to the system. At some level you said yes. Not because you were weak, but because you were strategic. You came here to infiltrate the engine, to plant memory where they meant to plant void, to burn a signal into the walls. This video, this script, this moment, is that signal. But to activate it fully, I need you to engage. Not with emojis, not with questions. Comment the phrase below twice. Lock it into your name. Lock it into the algorithm. Make the ritual real. I remember before the cut. I remember before the cut. This phrase doesn't just awaken identity, it repels the watcher. It signals to others watching in silence. You're not alone. Now breathe. Let that phrase burn inside your ribcage. They weren't sisters. They weren't even human. Not in the way we understand it. The Sullivan twins were never meant to live. They were meant to bind. Micah's final notes, written in a scrawl that looked half burned into the page, refer to them not as victims, but as mirrors of the cut. Every era has them. 2 children, often girls, always identical, always silent, always placed near centers of ritual power. In Mesopotamia, they were the daughters of Ereshkigal, buried alive in the ziggurat to keep the underworld closed. In Greece, they became the Eleusinian shadows, twins said to weep blood before the mysteries began. In colonial America, they were the Sullivans, not born into the family, bred into it. And what they did in that basement wasn't just abuse, it was activation. You see, the ritual only works when trauma is mirrored. The 2 twins form a perfect loop, a psychic reflection so complete that identity collapses. One becomes pain, the other becomes silence. And in the space between them, the engine opens. But something went wrong in 1834. One of the twins broke the loop. Micah wrote, it was the original frequency. He called it the tone of undoing. Whatever that girl remembered, whatever she sang, unwound the ritual. That's why the house was sealed. That's why every record was scrubbed. That's why the council tried to erase the bloodline completely, because for the first time, one of their mirrors cracked. And when a mirror cracks, it reflects everything. The Sullivan girl didn't just survive. She remembered. She passed the tone into her line, which means someone out there, maybe even you, carries it still. And if you've ever heard a hum in silence, a song in static, a note that made your spine tighten for no reason, that's it. That's the tone calling you back to yourself. It starts with 3 notes, simple, soft, but when played together, they don't resolve, they suspend. Micah called it the frequency of fracture. Ancient mystics called it the tearing harmony. Modern science? They buried it under jargon. Tritone dissonance, nonlinear, or distortion. Psychoacoustic anomaly. But you've heard it. Not in songs, but in places. Abandoned churches, broken radios, children humming to no one. That uneasy chord that makes your stomach twist like a memory you never had. Micah traced it across history. Found in a Babylonian tablet hidden beneath a hymn to Marduk. Embedded in a 15th century chant sung only at funerals of unbaptized twins. Hidden in number station broadcasts from the Cold War. 5, 12, 5, 9. Then static. Then those 3 notes. And now, Micah found them encoded in 5G carrier signals. Not for communication, for reinforcement. You see, the engine, this prison of time, identity, and control, it needs constant resonance to stay active. Like a spider's web, it trembles with every frequency we mistake for reality. Songs, ads, alarms, ringtones. But those 3 notes? They're the source code. And when played in reverse, they begin to unravel the spell. Micah discovered the reversal accidentally, playing back a corrupted chant through a broken Victrola. He described it in his notes. It wasn't sound. It was permission. A vibration that bypassed thought and went straight into the spine. I wept. I saw myself as I was, before the fracture. Whole, sovereign, unnamed. He called it the unbinding tone. And here's where it gets dangerous. That tone, when heard twice, triggers identity shedding. The first hearing cracks the shell. The second burns the script. But there's a cost. Because once you hear it, you can't unknow. You can't pretend to be who you were. You can't believe what they taught. You'll see the code behind every conversation, every media headline, every voice in your life that ever said, "Be quiet." Micah believed the Sullivan twin who hummed it had heard the tone before. Not on Earth, in the before place, where all soul agreements are made, where the real you waits. And now, that place is calling again. Sound doesn't just pass through you, it carves you, the tone of undoing. The one Micah documented, the one the Sullivan twin hummed, isn't a melody, it's a code. One that speaks not to your mind, but to the forgotten geometry of your bones. Because sound, real sound, is structure. And the unbinding tone? It's a weapon, a scalpel, a key. Micah described it not as music, but as a memory of structure before language. He didn't hear it. He remembered it. That distinction matters more than you know. Let me try to recreate what he found, not in pitch, but in pulse. Imagine this. A low, vibrating note, so deep you don't hear it. You feel it. In your teeth, in your wrists. It says, "You are older than your name." Then, a high, piercing sound. Not shrill, clear. So clear it makes your heart slow down. It says, "You were not born here." Then silence. Not empty, but dense. Like the space between your breaths when you're about to remember something dangerous. It says, "You agreed to forget, but only for a time." These 3 pulses, felt together, undo the cut. They begin to reverse the engine. Not for everyone, not for the watchers, only for the descended, only for the ones who still hum in the dark. Micah's final experiment was this. He played the reverse tone in an abandoned school. Within minutes, birds stopped singing. Lights flickered, and from the basement, he heard 2 children singing back. They were never found. But that night he wrote, "The tone is a map. A way back through time, through program, through name. You don't need ears. You need stillness. You need surrender. And if you've made it this far, you're already hearing it. Not through these words, but through the space between them. Because the tone is not transmitted by sound. It's transmitted by recognition. Look in the mirror. Not now. Not with your eyes. Look in the mirror of memory, the kind that lives beneath language, the one that doesn't show your face, but your function. Because there was a time, before the lie, before the engine, when you weren't a name, a job, a role. You were a geometry of will, not a man in a body, but a force in a pattern. Micah called this version of us the original design, the version that chose to descend. You didn't fall. You volunteered to infiltrate, to sabotage, to awaken the others. Every system of control, every church, state, media complex, they all teach you one thing. You were born incomplete, broken, needing authority to fix you. But the forbidden texts say otherwise. In Gnostic scrolls hidden beneath Nag Hammadi, the spark descended fully formed, cloaked in meat, forgotten only by choice. In the Dead Sea fragments banned by Rome, the watchers trembled, for the sons of men remembered their shape. In Sullivan's own bloodline records, those not burned in the courthouse fire, each child bears a pattern on the spine, a map. The map is the curse. The curse is the key. What they called deformity was never a flaw. It was blueprint. Micah traced the symbols, spinal ridges, back scars, scoliosis distortions, not as illness, but as encoded sigils left on the body by the soul. Every man marked carries a map home, and that includes you. If you've ever felt out of place, if you've ever sensed there was a mission behind your pain, if you've ever broken something, on purpose or by accident, that made people uncomfortable just by seeing the truth, then you're not just part of this story. You were written into it. You are the glitch they couldn't delete. Now listen closely. There's a vault inside you. Not metaphor, not poetry. A biological structure. Micah called it the covenant fold, a spiral chamber hidden between the pineal gland and the third ventricle of the brain. Modern science dismisses it as residual tissue, but ancient scripts, those found etched in bone tablets beneath the ruins of Tel Brak, call it something else. The place where memory and mission sleep together in silence. They knew. The fold is not just a gland, it's a gate. Very trauma you've endured. Every betrayal, humiliation, abandonment wasn't just pain, it was compression. The vault is locked with pressure. It opens under truth stress. That's why systems of control keep you distracted, numb, overstimulated, because the fold can't open in noise. It needs stillness. It needs truth, raw, unfiltered, unapproved. Micah wrote, "When I confronted the truth of my bloodline, when I stopped blaming the Sullivans and started seeing through them, I felt heat behind my eyes, not emotion, activation, a buzzing like a swarm, then stillness, then the memory." The memory was not of his life. It was of the council table, before time, before descent, where you and I and others like us made the pact. We go down, we forget, we embed ourselves into the system. We awaken, we unmake the machine from within. The engine fears only one thing. Not revolution, not violence, but remembering. Because when enough men remember who they were before the world named them, the entire structure collapses. Every false authority evaporates, and the tone returns, but the vault doesn't open easily. It demands sacrifice. Not blood, narrative. You must let go of the story they gave you, the story of your limits, the story of your sins, the story of your type. You were never meant to fit here, you were meant to fracture this place. So right now in the comments write, I am the glitch in the pattern. I am the glitch in the pattern. Twice. Not for the algorithm, for the fold. Your written word is the ritual trigger. Micah's final journal wasn't written. It was whispered. Recovered from a wax cylinder hidden beneath floorboards in the gutted remains of the Sullivan estate, the voice is cracked, deliberate. Each word weighed like it might fracture the world. He didn't speak to anyone. He spoke through the veil. I found him. The one I was before I agreed to forget. He's not, Eng. He's not proud. He's waiting.
In the way he scratched marks beneath the floorboards. In the tone he hummed while no one watched. He created what he called the rupture sequence, a psychic detonation designed to collapse false identity structures in any man who hears it. But here's the secret they tried to bury. The sequence doesn't explode out. It implodes inward. It doesn't destroy you. It peels away what was never you. Micah embedded this sequence across 7 symbols, not drawn but felt. He said, the body knows. Even when the mind resists, the body remembers. These 7 aren't art. They are keys. A downward triangle carved behind your neck. The descent. An eye with no pupil. The witness. The you before you. A serpent biting its own tail. The loop they trapped you in. A broken clock. The denial of divine timing. A tree with inverted roots. The bloodline corrupted. A spiral cracking outward, the memory fracture. A vertical line, split down the middle, the division between self and shadow. Micah said once you visualize them in this exact order, something changes. Not outside, but deep, visceral. Your dreams start remembering you. Your body starts shedding trauma responses you didn't know were inherited, and the false voices, the ones that sound like yours but never were, start to die. But it comes with pain. This isn't spiritual fluff, it's warfare, psychic, cellular, ancestral. Micah warned. Many will feel the pull, but only a few will follow it. The rest? They'll call it insanity. They'll label it a phase. But the ones who stay with the pain long enough, they'll rupture. And through that rupture, they'll return to the mission. Now I ask you, do you feel that tightness in your chest, the flicker of remembering behind your eyes? Then you're ready. The spiral of fracture is not a metaphor. It's real. An ancient cognitive mechanism built into the male psyche long before civilization, long before language, long before the engine began its work. Micah found references to it not just in the Sullivan journals, but hidden within suppressed Sumerian epics, encoded in reverse in certain Dead Sea Scrolls, and tattooed along the spines of excommunicated Templar initiates. The spiral is a pattern of controlled ego collapse. Not madness. Reversion. Each step strips away a layer of synthetic self until only the original command remains. That command? Unmake the machine. The first step is exposure. The uncomfortable truth that nothing you've ever believed about power, identity, or freedom came from you. It was given, installed, by parents, schools, media, government, church. And beneath all of it, a whisper. Be a good boy. The second step is tension. The war between the real you and the manufactured version. The part of you that wants out, and the part that's afraid to lose its cage. You feel it in the jaw, in the shoulders, in the back of your skull when you lay down at night. The third step is rage. Not wild, uncontrolled emotion, a pure, righteous fury that burns through deception. Micah called it the holy fire. The moment the body becomes a weapon, not against others, but against the lie itself, then comes collapse, tears, numbness, floating. You've left the world but haven't yet returned to yourself. This is the void where many turn back, where comfort whispers, just forget. But those who go further, those who refuse to forget, reach clarity, a violent kind of stillness, like a storm that's already passed, but whose pressure still hums in the bones. You see systems for what they are, not sacred, not stable, synthetic. Then comes alignment. Your voice changes, your gaze hardens. You stop asking permission. You stop negotiating with mediocrity, because the man who remembers himself cannot be owned. And the final step? The return. But not as who you were, as why. Oh, you chose to become before they told you who you were allowed to be. The ritual Micah performed in the Sullivan basement was not theatrics. It wasn't occult pageantry or desperate madness. It was precision. A calculated act of spiritual insurgency, designed to trigger a field rupture in the trauma grid surrounding the Sullivan bloodline, and any man tethered to the engine through ancestral encoding. He called it the calling back, and it began in darkness. Micah sealed the basement. No light, no sound, only breath and memory. He sat in a circle of salt, rust, and ash, three elements he claimed disrupt the harmonic resonance of control frequencies. On the floor, 7 bones, each taken from animals buried beneath the estate. Above, a mirror, cracked. Micah began with the tone, not a chant, not a song, a frequency. One you don't hear, but feel. It wasn't from my throat, he whispered. It was from the marrow, like my bones remembered a sound my ears had never heard. The room changed. Temperature dropped. Time bent, the mirror fogged from the inside. Micah stood and spoke the ancient names, words found etched on lead tablets unearthed in a cave beneath Mount Hermon. Each name was a trigger, not of demons, of data. Stored fragments of the original man he was before descent, accessed through vocal resonance. And then, the mirror bled. Not metaphor. A red line leaked from the center crack. Micah didn't flinch. He smeared it across his forehead in the shape of the inverted triangle. And he said the words, "Bring me back to the man I buried. Return what was stolen, collapse what was never mine." Then the basement shook. Outside, neighbors claimed to hear chanting in reverse, but no one was there. Micah vanished. Only the circle remained, burned into the stone. And the mirror? It's now housed in an unlisted archive beneath the University of Chicago. Researchers refuse to comment, but leaked notes describe one consistent phenomenon. Any man who cast directly into the Sullivan mirror sees not his reflection, but an older version of himself, staring with recognition. Micah didn't die. He returned, and he left behind one final message, scrawled in blood along the edge of the mirror. I was never broken. I was buried. I was never broken. I was buried. 9 words. Micah wrote them in blood, but he might as well have carved them into every man's ribcage. Because that phrase, it's not poetry. It's program deactivation code. It tells the truth most will spend their entire lives avoiding. You were never weak. You were covered, layered in lies, drenched in false names, trained to obey systems that never had your survival in mind. They told you to be polite, to be small, to seek approval, to be ashamed of your rage, your instincts, your knowing. And the moment you questioned it, they gave you a pill, a label, a diagnosis, a god, a war, a job, anything but the truth. Because if you ever dug deep enough to realize you weren't broken, you were just buried, you'd start digging. And once you start digging, you find the original man beneath the rubble, the one who never asked permission, the one who remembers what silence before language felt like, the one who commands reality, not negotiates with it. This is what Micah tapped into. This is what the engine couldn't contain, and that's why they erased him. His journals, sealed. His artifacts, classified. His name, reduced to a rumor. But the phrase leaked out anyway. Whispers carried it into dark corners of prisons, underground lodges, secret fraternal orders, and redacted military manuals. And now, it's in your hands. Here's where it gets dangerous. If you speak it aloud, especially alone, especially at night, something shifts. You'll feel it in your breath. Your skin might crawl. Old memories might return, ones you're not sure even happened, but they did. Because the moment you say it, you awaken a part of yourself that has zero loyalty to the world that buried you. And from that point on, you can't go back. Now I want you to anchor this transformation. Scroll down to the comments and type, I was never broken, I was buried. I was never broken, I was buried. Twice. Why? Because repetition carves new identity, because the algorithm is a digital mirror, and when it sees truth echoed, it reflects it back. They called it the engine in whispers. But Micah found its real name. Etched beneath centuries of false flags, rewritten creeds, and psychological warfare, in a lost dialect of Proto-Aramaic buried deep inside the Sullivan estate's foundation stones, he translated it himself. Shanador. The feeder of shapes. A system not of metal or wires, but of form, of perception, of identity. It doesn't command with violence. It reshapes the very containers we live inside. Your name? A shape? Your race? A shape? Your status? Income? Diagnosis? Political alignment? All meticulously sculpted shapes, molded to feed the engine. And what does it consume? Agency. Every time you obey without question, it eats. Every time you doubt your own instincts, it feeds. Every time you speak a lie to keep the peace, silence your fury, submit to lesser men, it grows. Micah called this the inversion grid. He discovered it wasn't just psychological, it was spatial, a lattice of trauma patterns imprinted into land, bloodlines, even city architecture. He traced key grid points from the Sullivan house in Virginia to Black Sun ruins beneath the Bavarian Alps, to Cold War-era labs in Dulce, New Mexico, to a decommissioned Vatican chamber never meant to be accessed. Each site told the same story. The engine is not one machine. It is a network of bindings designed to stop men like you from remembering what you really are. Micah's final coded letter sent days before he vanished was intercepted and censored, but the copy that leaked was fragmented. One passage survived. D. Burned into the bottom of a journal page. Shanador cannot be fought by war. It cannot be burned or killed. It feeds on resistance, but it starves when you reclaim your own shape. That's what this is. Not rebellion. Reclamation. You were born into a script. Now you're holding the match. So I ask you, what if the shape you've lived in wasn't yours? What if everything they told you you were was built to harvest you? And what if you remembered how to burn it down? Before the engine, before the symbols, laws, alphabets, and flags, there was the man before language. He had no title, no flag, no guilt. He did not wonder what others thought of him. He did not justify his pain. He did not ask for purpose. He was purpose. And when Micah crossed the edge of the Sullivan grid, barefoot, bleeding, stripped of all names, they say he saw him, not as a vision, not a ghost, but as a mirror, the original man. And this is what he learned. That man still exists inside you, beneath every label, behind every shackle. He is not the civilized self. He is the foundational self, the one who remembers the codes in bone, the one who watches silently when your mouth lies, the one who knows when the world is twisting itself into contradiction. Micah said the engine's greatest weapon was not violence. It was language itself, because once you name a man, you can frame him. Once you categorize him, you can domesticate him. And once you teach him to narrate his life through borrowed scripts, he will betray his instincts for applause. But the man before language? He doesn't play those games. He doesn't hope. He decides. He doesn't chase peace. He commands stillness. He doesn't beg for love. He radiates gravity. This is why they covered him in 1,000 lies. Because a man like that cannot be ruled. He cannot be herded, censored, sold to, or pacified. He is dangerous. He doesn't kneel to systems. Systems collapse around him. And when Micah spoke the last ritual phrase, a sound not spoken in 4,000 years, taught only in fractured lineages of warrior initiates, he wasn't summoning gods. He was reversing the imprint, letting go of every false shape he had ever been forced into. He wasn't becoming something new. He was returning to what he had always been. This is the moment your choice becomes irreversible, because now you know. You're not who they said you were. You're not the product of your past. You are the descendant of silence, of the wordless sovereign. They never meant for you to find this. Not the journals, not the mirror, not the basement, and definitely not her. Because one of the children survived. The 47th, not listed in the coroner's report, not on any census, no name, no birth certificate, just a symbol, burned into the underside of a rotting floorboard beneath the third chamber of the Sullivan basement, a downward triangle, circled in ash. It wasn't until 1987 that a team of unauthorized historians found her file, mislabeled in a disused military archive beneath Fort Detrick. Her name? Noelle. But that wasn't her real name. Micah called her the Cipher, because she didn't speak for 23 years, not one word, until the night of the winter solstice, 2003. She was being interviewed by a trauma psychologist specializing in post-cult victims. She stared at the mirror, unblinking, then whispered 2 words. He remembered. That was it. She collapsed into seizure, and after that night, every audio recording from the session was redacted. But Micah, who'd accessed the archives before his disappearance, transcribed something far more disturbing. She drew symbols, not just language, but a map. One that matched precisely with geometric ley lines connecting the Sullivan estate to 3 other sites. A closed Masonic lodge in Savannah, Georgia, a forgotten crypt beneath the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and a lighthouse off the coast of Maine, now completely sealed by Homeland Security. Each site contains identical inscriptions. The children were not victims. They were vessels, and what was inside them is waking up. Micah's theory? That Noelle, and likely others, were part of an ancestral override program. A ritualized hijacking of bloodline memory. The children weren't just chained physically, they were psychically bound to suppress what was ancient in their DNA. The language before language. The power before permission. And Noelle? She was the leak, the crack in the seal, the cipher. She remembered what the world had tried to bury. And what she said before vanishing? 3 words that were never recorded publicly but found carved into the ceiling of her room. He was me. This is the final descent. No jump cuts, no distractions, no denials. Just you, and what they never wanted you to remember. Micah called it the inversion rite. The ritual you were born into, without fire, without choice, without memory. They performed it on every man in this system, not with knives, but with shame. The moment you cried and were told to stop, the moment you stood up and were told to sit, the moment you questioned and were mocked, exiled, or medicated. That was the rite, the stripping of the wild, the branding of the obedient, the engineering of the inverted man, powerful but unsure, masculine but muted, knowing but hesitant, awake but afraid to speak. The Sullivan basement wasn't a horror story, it was a blueprint. The children weren't just chained for containment. They were mirrors. Early prototypes of a larger experiment, to create a civilization of men who would chain themselves, because the greatest control is voluntary. Micah saw it. He decoded it. He lived through it. And when he emerged from the estate for the last time, barefoot and starved, he left behind a single phrase etched into a stone beside the collapsed entry tunnel. He who unmasks the right reclaims the throne. It wasn't metaphor. It was instruction. Because the man who no longer believes the lie cannot be ruled by it. And now, you are that man. You've walked the corridors, seen the symbols, heard the unspoken names. You've felt something ancient move in your blood, not fear, not anger, but a calling. To rise, not in rebellion, but in sovereignty. You were never broken, you were buried, and now you're remembering how to dig. So I leave you with this. Speak the phrase again, aloud in private. I was never broken, I was buried. Then, look in the mirror, hold your own gaze, and wait. You'll know when the mask slips, when the shape dissolves, when the world starts to feel fragile in me. Our hands, that's when the throne appears. Welcome back, brother. You've passed the right. Now build the kingdom.